Well, hello everyone, and welcome to tonight's live stream. So glad you could make it. Let me do some adjusting here. Hey there, Kevin. Glad you could make it. So I don't know what we got going on tonight, but I'm sure we will find something to get up to. Coming to you from my homemade sound booth in the back of my bedroom. I've left some links up there if you guys aren't patrons or you want a book or something, come on down. We got plenty. What are you guys up to today, anyway? Been doing all right? Hopefully, everything's going well for you. We're just kind of hanging out tonight. Nothing really on the docket. Just another live stream. Well, we are gearing up for the Halloween season, so if you guys are looking forward to Halloween, then by all means, it's going to be a doozy this year. I've uh, I've been trying to get a little bit ahead and get some recordings in, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun this year. Let me move some stuff around here. I swear. Okay, there. Trying to move the chat bar tab down. For some reason Steam Labs doesn't want to put it on the sidebar like it's supposed to. I'm not sure why it does that, but we will persevere. Alrighty. So that is a good series. I think he just came out with his latest episode actually, so you should hear a familiar voice in there. Um, Not to mention that I wrote over half of it, so there's that too. Um, yeah, it's been a fun series to write. Probably just about to finish out season 2, and then we'll be off to season 3. But yeah, should be a lot more to come from that one. Hopefully, we'll get some more looky loos here in a minute. If anybody's got any burning questions, I'd be glad to answer them. Otherwise, you're probably just going to sit here and watch me write stuff. I'm still working on some last minute Halloween stories, so I've got some that are coming together pretty well. Well, thank you. I agree. Like I said, it's one of my favorites. I was really glad he brought me in on it. I've enjoyed writing it immensely. I enjoyed writing it immensely. It's been a lot of work, but it's a labor of love for definite. I think there's a lot of good stuff coming up next season, but I'll try not to talk about it too much since he's not here to curb my enthusiasm. got a pretty full got a pretty full Halloween bid this year. I've um I've got 4 new series that to come out around the Halloween season, and then 5, I guess, if you count the other one. Um, and then just some regular Halloween stories and some Halloween stories from Kashmir and some Halloween stories from the Botanical Gardens and from Stragview and from Dr. Winters. So should be should be a lot of fun. I think you guys will enjoy it. We'll be going all the way up to November 1st, and then I think we're gonna do the rest of the Dollar General stuff. I think there's 5 more installments left, and I know you guys have been looking forward to seeing it. So I think that's where we'll probably go after that. But you never know what we might get up to. Once Hope you guys are caught up on the grandpa stuff. We had kind of a big grandpa story last night. Well, thank you. It took me a long time to get comfortable with my voice, actually. I really didn't like it very much, and I was very hesitant to put it out there. But I think it all turned out for the best, honestly. Get a few things posted up there so we can let people know what's going on. Alrighty. So, anybody got anything? Questions? Anything? Got the August compilation going up today. I see it just hit. So we might be losing some viewership to that. I know you guys like your long ones, and this one is God, how long is this one? 3.5 hours. So that's a biggie. And then tomorrow's the other one of the just the Redditor stories are 2 hours. So it's going to be a big one this month. And then we'll move right on into Halloween weekend or Halloween week next week. So it'll be a full week of Stragview stuff and Botanical Garden stuff and just regular Halloween stories. So that should be fun. Hmm. I'm working on the third part of the Dr. Winters story right now. There should be another part after this. I think you guys will like it. It's kind of a biggie. And then I've got a I've got a series after Christmas. No, I can't talk today. After Halloween for the grandpa stuff, where we're gonna do a little crossover with Kashmir Hospital, which should be fun too. How long have you been doing these stories? On YouTube, about 3 years. In general, almost 10, I guess. I started before I went to work at the prison, so that was about 8 years ago. So yeah, coming up on 10. I've been writing since I was 8, and Monday will be my no Tuesday will be my 38th birthday. So I've been writing for close to 30 years. I know that I know that sounds weird, but yeah, like I've been writing since I was in like elementary school. Like I would write stuff down. I've always liked stories and things, and it helped helped me stay attentive in class. I was always one of those students that was really good in English, but not so great in other places. Let's see, we've got a few more people coming in. Welcome everyone. We really haven't started doing anything yet. We're just kind of chit chatting. So come on in. Like I was telling Kevin, I hope you guys are up to date on your grandpa stories because we had a biggie last night that really sets us up for the series to come. I think a lot of people were a little bit surprised in the direction that I took that one. I think it's the best time to write is when you're a kid. Like I think it really helps you like work out some of the kinks in your writing style. That way when you're old like me, you know where you're trying to go with that. Um I do hate how long it took me to come to horror. Like I only started writing horror about 10 years ago. Like it had been fantasy up to that point, of which I am glad I got out of. But yeah, no. Hey, hey. Oh, another sleep listener. That's fine. We I like I like being the last thing you guys hear before you go to sleep. It's fine with me. I don't know how some of you guys listen to this stuff and go to sleep. It's some of it's horrific, but you know, to each their own there. Oh. Oop, move that out of the way before the magnet wonks with something. But yeah, no, it's there's a lot up there. Like I had sent somebody to check out the playlists yesterday, and they were like, "Well, which one do you recommend?" I'm like, "I don't know. I have so many. Like there's a ton of them up there. It's it's nuts. God, I think we're up to like five five series on Monday, five series on Friday, and then we've got Dollar General, and a couple of the Haunted House series, which I've got a surprise for this year. But just I've got a lot of series. It's it's come time for me to end a few of them, but I don't think anybody ever wants that to happen. Like every time I talk about ending the grandpa stuff, everybody freaks out. So I mean, it's coming. Like eventually, we're going to, but not for a while yet. Like I'd say you guys have got a while left with good old Gramps there. But it's a ride. Like I definitely enjoy it. Any questions about any of the series? Like I will gladly field questions. If not, I guess I can find something to read here. Let's see. Oh, we can do some fall frights. 'Tis the season after all. Um, let's see. What made me leap from right? Well, Mr. Creepypasta, believe it or not. He and Creeps and Lighthouse and a few different guys used to ask me if they could read my stories, and of course I said yes because I was fans of theirs. So the thought of them reading my stuff was crazy to me. But so at one point, Mr. Creepypasta's like, "Hey, why don't you narrate your own stuff? Like, you've got so many stories. Why don't you do your own narrations?" And I was like, "No, I couldn't do that. My voice is trash." And he's like, I bet it's not that bad. He's like, look, narrate a few, and if people tell you they can't stand the way your voice sounds, your voice is trash and you should stop. But as long as people are listening, then, you're doing fine. And so I tried it out and found that people liked listening to me read stuff. So I just kept doing it. I'm glad. It's really what I enjoy doing. It's gotten to a point where it's a means I can almost support myself by. We're getting there. Like, not to kiss and tell, but YouTube next month will have to cut me a check for $500. So it's going pretty well. I'm about to hit that golden point where I can pay my bills with what I do on YouTube. So I'm excited. It's going to be a good thing. It'll be good. How do I develop my characters? Well, the Stragview characters, like if you've read any of the Stragview stuff, a lot of that was people I've worked with in corrections. Like a lot of the guards in the Stragview camp, or some of the inmates in the Stragview camp, are guards or people that I've worked with, or just people I've interacted with in DOC. And I think that adds a certain level of humanity to them when you can know that they're based on real people. I'm not really sure how I came across some of the characters. Like Dr. Winters. Dr. Winters was a bit of a surprise. I had really just meant for her to be a one-off background character, but she really kind of took on a life of her own. The Warden popped up once, and I liked how creepy the character was so much that I made him into a character, a regular character. Grandpa was easy. Grandpa's just my grandpa. Like, my grandpa used to tell us stories all the time. Not about what Grandpa tells stories about, but, about story stuff. And I liked it. I figured everybody likes having their grandpa tell them a story. Certain other characters, I don't know. You write about them and they take on a life of their own. I like to tell people, like, kind of jokingly, but I write so much about, there's a door that I write about, and like all of these writers like dream about it and they see it and they interact with the door. That's my writing process. Sometimes that's things I hear through the door, and they become characters and stories and things. It's neat. It's weird when it happens, but it's neat. Oh, shit. Oh, yeah. I'm just going to read something. Let's see. Looking for a good one. I'm sure they're all good, but I'm looking for a really good one. Let's see. I guess we could do the Whistler. The Whistler's always a good time. If you'd like your own copy, there's a link up there to my books on Amazon. That's to my page basically. So if you want your own book, go up there. It's got all my books. I've written like 8 or 9 now, so you'll have some stuff to choose from. Let's see. The Whistler. Clint turned his head suddenly as the rustle came from the woods. He had heard it a few times, but it was getting harder and harder to put out of his mind. The moon hung high overhead, a ghostly full moon that seemed fitting for Halloween night, and despite its size, it provided very little light. Reggie and Terry seemed unable to hear it, but Clint was very aware of every sound. The closer the crunching seemed to come to them. The cheesy yellow glow of his flashlight did very little to penetrate the familiar depths of the woods, and Clint was beginning to feel the hair on the back of his neck. Normally, Stokes Woods was a place of sanctuary for the boys, but tonight Clint felt as though they were being pursued through a children's story by the big bad wolf. Hey, Shannon, you're right on time. We're just starting a story. We're listening to The Whistler. I'll if you guys have questions or anything you want to ask, just put them in the comments, and I'll stop periodically and answer some questions, and then get back to the story. This was the first place he had ever truly been afraid in these woods. It's the first time he had ever truly been afraid in these woods. But Stokes Woods was a place of firsts for him and his friends. They had grown up in a pretty typical suburban neighborhood. White picket fences, ticky-tacky suburban houses, endless concrete for them to ride their bikes. The only strangers they saw were the occasional drifters or travelers that wandered through their town, and most of them kept right on moving. Clint's dad worked at the steel mill, and his mom was a homemaker. Clint, no, Clint wasn't inundated with the problems that he often saw the city kids deal with on TV. There were no gangs or bullies, at least none that bothered him, and his afternoons were usually filled with bike rides, trips to the arcade, Boy Scout meetings, and exploring Stokes Woods. The woods the woods lay beyond the last house in the cul-de-sac, and it was a little more than a barren stretch of scraggy pulp trees. They were pretty big, though, once you got past the pulpwoods. Clint could believe that kids got lost out there. The trees got taller and closer together, and it always made Clint feel like a real explorer when he and his friends passed out of the scrublands and into the actual forest. Hey, Jennifer, good to see you. You're right on time. We're reading The Whistler. That is a good one, Shannon. It's a great story. It's one of my favorites. They spent summer days. Oh, if you've got any questions or anything you want to talk about, just put it up in the comments, and periodically I'll stop reading and answer questions. They spent summer days exploring Stokes Woods, making maps and setting up camps that would be found again later to their great amusement. It was their first brush with death, finding birds or animal carcasses on the trail, poking them with sticks, and getting grossed out as the bugs crawled out. The three never guessed that one day they might share the fate of those animals. They were young, therefore immortal. Their deaths were as unexpected as the start of school again in August, and would take them as much by surprise as the first bell did every year. The woods were the first time Clint had ever swore, yelling "damn it" when he skinned his knee one day. The others had looked at him with awe and fear, but soon they were all saying it, and worse. Clint was in the woods the first time he saw a naked woman, the three of them perusing the glossy pages of Terry's dad's Playboy as they sat around a campfire one night. It was where he had his first camping trip, where he'd first spent a night without his parents, and it was also where he had found the treehouse. The treehouse was a relic of kids gone by. The young A. The treehouse was a relic of kids gone by. It was in a big old tree set in a clearing. There was a fire pit dug in the shadows, with a dumbwaiter to pull things up and a rope ladder to climb up through the trapdoor. It had been built in pieces, that much was obvious. There was a wall outside with the signatures of kids who added to it, complete with dates when they had completed them. When the boys had come across it one afternoon, their 9-year-old eyes had grown wide with wonder. They knew they had discovered something special. Over the next few days, they had painted it too, finding some paint at the junkyard and painting the faded treasure in a wash of purples and browns and golds. They added a bike rack, finding some slightly used wood at the junkyard, and signed their names and dates on the wall when the project was done. The easy trip to and from the junkyard made Clint believe that the treehouse might have been constructed from things the kids found at the junkyard. They asked Old Man Massey, the caretaker, and he said that kids had been coming and going for years, taking stuff for a project in the woods. They never said what it was, but I always hoped that they were putting it to good use. Nobody else wanted this old junk, and it's good that those kids can do something useful with it. They always feel that way. I remember a couple of times as a kid that I definitely felt like I could have died, but I was glad I didn't. Yeah, I remember the first time you realize that you can cuss and like God's not going to send a lightning bolt down from the sky to get you. But, it's always interesting. I hear you, Jennifer. Sometimes I sneeze wrong and throw my back out. It's not fun. He grinned when the boys told him about the treehouse and said it sounded like a lofty use for such horrible junk. Clint and his friends had been playing and camping and using the treehouse for a couple of years when Terry suggested a Halloween sleepover. It's on a Friday. We can camp out in the treehouse, eat candy, and tell scary stories. Clint thought it sounded like a great idea, and his parents agreed. 3 kids alone in the woods may sound weird to some of you, but the town the boys lived in was very rural. Their town had a population of around 1,200, and crime was almost non existent. Besides the odd travelers that sometimes blew through, everyone knew their neighbors very well. Besides, the boys had camped in the woods for the last 2 years, and the Boy Scouts had taught them how to do it safely without burning the damn woods down. What could go wrong? There you go. Yeah, I thought I was a little rebel, but apparently like I was pretty bland when I look back at it. Clint turned his flashlight back on the woods as a loud, dry branch audibly snapped. He was having a hard time believing that it was just a curious deer or a raccoon, hoping to snag some of their food once they had stopped. As they walked, Clint could hear what he could swear that he heard something else following them. It was a soft whistling, like someone very far away who was occupying themselves by whistling nonsense. The tune made no sense, and yet it did. He felt like he had heard it somewhere before, but couldn't place it. The whistling was much too far away, though. It couldn't be a thing that was breaking the sticks, could it? Come on, Clint, Terry yelled, and Clint jumped when he realized how far behind he had gotten. We'll never get there at this rate. I mean, it beats the alternative, though, for definite. 250, goodness. Sounds like you lived in the town in Georgia I used to live in. I think we were lucky to break 1,000 people sometimes. I think we had more cows than we had people, honestly. I miss it sometimes, though. Small town living bored me when I was a kid, but now I think that's what I'd like most. Clint turned and sprinted back towards the group, glad to see the woods standing sturdy and inviting before him. They would be at the treehouse soon. Clint and his friends had hit the streets before 6, just as the other trick-or-treaters were getting started. By 8, as the lamps came to life and the little kids began to head back inside, all 3 had pillowcases bulging with sweets. They had traded their costumes for warmer camp clothes, and after a good-night kiss and a promise of safety, Clint had set off for the woods. He'd met Terry and Reggie at the edge of Stokes Woods, and Reggie already had a small pile of wrappers in his pocket. The moon was sufficient to navigate through the pulp woods, and they hadn't even turned on their flashlights until they neared the deep woods. Terry and Reggie talked excitedly about the candy, wanting to tell ghost stories as they ate sweets and trade their favorites. Clint had talked animatedly with them, but he had been distracted. He could swear there was a noise in the woods. It was probably a bird or a high-pitched wind, but as they moved towards the treehouse, it seemed to follow them. The other 2 were oblivious, but the sound made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. It came closer and closer, but never reached the boys. It actually seemed to pass the group sometimes, and Clint heard it as often behind them as he did beyond them. Then the treehouse rose up to greet them, and Clint sighed in relief. Yeah, we had plenty of corn. See, we had a McDonald's and we had a Walmart, but that was about it. Like, if you wanted a mall, you had to drive to Gainesville. I don't even think we had a decent Goodwill. Like, if you wanted to go to Goodwill, you had to go into Franklin. It was wild. I was used to living in Panama City, so I was used to having everything right where I could get at it. If you're just joining us, we're reading The Whistler, and it's just about to get good. So Like I tell them, if you've got any burning questions, leave them in the comments, and we'll talk Halloween stories. We'll talk anything. This is you guys' stream. I am here for you guys. In the light of the full moon, though, it had taken on a ghostly appearance of its own. The black windows seemed like staring eyes, the Spanish moss that hung from the limbs like webs from a spider. Clint felt a little chill run through him at the sight of it, but it certainly beat the thought of finding out what was making that ethereal whistling. Clint had hoped the noise would cease to be an issue once they arrived, but as they loaded their bags into the dumbwaiter, he could hear that the whistling still surrounded them. It came from all sides now, seeming to be in many places at once, and he rushed them a little as Terry and Reggie began to roughhouse. This netted Clint some grumpy looks, but he barely noticed. Clint wanted to be out of the woods and into the safety of the treehouse as soon as possible, and once they were safe inside, lanterns on, candy spilled out onto the floor, he began to feel a little safe. This was their sanctuary. Nothing bad could happen to them here. They were children who had yet to experience loss or real trauma, and they were secure in the knowledge that their parents would still protect them from anything, no matter how bad it got. They were foolish, but children are supposed to be foolish, I suppose. Most children don't get to learn any different if they're lucky. What is it? The closer the sound, the further it is away. I don't know. I think it's vice versa. Dang, that's a pretty good trade. I do like my beef. We're reading The Whistler if you're just joining us. Like I keep saying, if you've got questions or anything, just leave them in the chat, and I will get to them a little in between paragraphs. Reggie was halfway through one of the full-size candy bars that the Hudsons had been giving out when Terry suggested they start the ghost stories. Clint agreed and told Terry to go right ahead and tell the first one. Terry loved scary stories, and he usually had a pretty good collection of them from the internet or wherever. Reggie pulled a beanbag chair over from the corner, and Clint dragged a camp chair over so the boys could group up around the lantern. Typically, they would tell their stories around the fire pit, but they all sensed that it would be better to be inside tonight. Halloween was unique somehow. It was best to be inside after dark, lest the boogans and the spirits that roam the roads found you. Terry brought the flashlight up under his chin, tilting the light knob down on the lantern, and grinned at them ghoulishly. "This is a true story. I swear it on my life," he said theatrically, before beginning his story. He began a story about a kid plagued by the ghost of a hobo he and his friends had accidentally killed. They had been playing tricks on him, and he had choked to death on a sandwich. After he died, the boys kept seeing him around town, in windows, in a store, on the street corner, even in his own bedroom, but his friends wouldn't believe him. Then, while the boys were at the sleepover, the ghost struck. Clint listened, but he found himself distracted as Terry unspooled the story. The wind blew against the treehouse, creaking it in the branches of the old tree, but beneath the wind, Clint heard a whistling sound that seemed very familiar. That same whistling was coming from outside, a high-pitched keen that was no longer altogether tuneless. As he listened to it, Clint thought it almost seemed to move through the surrounding trees as Terry wove his story. I heard somewhere that if you hear something. I don't know. That's a good question. I always heard if you could hear it that it was close, but I don't know. Of course, I also heard not to whistle in the woods either, so I don't know. Let's see. Terry came to the climax of his tale, and the boy's friends died badly. The boy escaped the sleepover and ran to his house. The ghostly hobo dogged his heels, screaming his name as he chased him through the quiet streets. But the boy had made it home and slammed the door in his rotting face. He had leaned against it, safe at last, but as the banging began, he remembered one crucial fact. His parents were gone, Terry said, grinning in the flashlight beam. He might have made it home, but he was still at the mercy of the ghostly apparition. Terry told them how the door had bowed inward, the ragged hands pushing the wood like wax paper. But Clint felt his attention dragged away again. He could still hear the whistling. It was closer now, and he would swear there was another noise, too. Rustling leaves, maybe? Or leaves crackling underfoot. Was someone outside the treehouse? And as Patches pushed at his door, trying to catch him, the boy snuck out his window and disappeared into the night, never to be seen again. It is bad juju to whistle outside, from what I've always heard. Terry noticed that Clint wasn't really paying attention, and Clint turned as the boy made a disgusted noise. "Oh, come on, that was a great story." Clint shrugged, trying to keep his eyes on Terry, but failing miserably. "Yeah, sorry, something was distracting me outside." Reggie looked quizzically at him. "What was it?" Clint went to the window and looked out into the inky darkness. The moon cast everything in a hazy, otherworldly light, and Clint could see nothing but the vague outline of the forest and the ghostly silhouette of the object in the yard below. The whistling was still little more than an annoying afterthought, but it seemed like it was getting closer by the second. Clint wasn't sure what it was, but he knew he didn't want it anywhere near him or his friends. "Clint, Clint, see any Martians down there?" Terry joked. "I thought I heard something outside, around on the leaves." Terry joined him at the window, and Reggie walked over to look out into the inky blackness too. The moon cast an odd light over their faces, but as he scanned the ground, it gave away no sudden surprises. Both boys shrugged their shoulders and returned to the lantern when nothing emerged from the woods, but Clint was slower to come back. He heard rustling and came back to find Terry reaching into his bag for a candy bar. Clint made a half-serious noise and walked back to challenge him for it, but Terry had already started pushing it into his mouth, and as he and Clint began to tussle playfully. When the two separated, Clint had almost put the whistling out of his mind. We're reading The Whistler if any of you are just joining us, so pull up a chair. This should be interesting. Terry began another story about a shadow creature that lived in a stairwell, and Clint took his seat as he listened to Terry try to set the scene. As he laid out the narrative, though, Clint could hear the whistling again. It wormed into his subconscious, spinning through the trees outside like a drunken bird. Clint could hear the leaves crunching again, the wind making them rustle with skeletal wind chimes. And suddenly, Clint wanted to return to the window and look into the night. He was trying to listen to Terry's story, but the more he tried, the more Clint heard the noises from down below. When Clint interrupted his story to drag up the rope ladder, Terry definitely looked miffed. Clint hooked the latch and came back to find him with his arms crossed and an indignant look on his face. As he took his seat and Terry didn't begin the story again, Clint felt a little subconscious and asked what was up. "Think you can do a better story?" Terry asked, his hurt coming out in the question. "Well then, hotshot, have at it." He tossed the flashlight at Clint, and he caught it by reflex. Clint thought about it for a moment, starting to decline before realizing that he did have a story. Maybe by getting it out there, Clint would alleviate the fears consuming him. Clint had come to the realization that he was ruining his Halloween campout. And for what? Some noise outside the treehouse? It was probably just a raccoon or something that had spooked him when he arrived. His unease, however, had given Clint the perfect story. Okay, I think maybe I do have a story. We're reading The Whistler if you're just joining us, so if you've got any questions or anything, put them in the chat and I will answer them in between paragraphs. Terry flicked his hand at him to go on, and even Reggie sat forward a little in his chair. So these three kids were walking in the woods. They were going camping, and they were heading to a familiar spot in the woods to set up. They left their home at dusk. Sorry. They left their home at dusk, wanting to camp out under the stars in just their sleeping bags. Their parents told them that if anything went wrong, they could come home and sleep there, but the boys had done this hundreds of times and felt that they knew the woods like the back of their hand. They felt like nothing in the woods could surprise them. They were wrong. Terry sneered, but he sat closer to the lantern and listened nonetheless. Reggie opened another candy bar, the story drawing him in the story drawing him in as the stories almost always did. Reggie didn't seem to like scary things. He was kind of a scaredy cat, but he liked the story. He would sit and listen, getting more and more terrified, but always beg for another when they were done. They walked towards the they walked towards the determined campsite, talking talking animatedly about the s'mores they would make and the scary stories they would tell. One of them kept hearing something as they walked, though. He heard the snap of a twig, the crunch of a leaf, and it made him wary. He told his friends, but they shrugged it off as nothing. It was late afternoon, the sun was setting, and animals were coming out to hunt. They were probably just hearing a critter moving around in the dry leaves. The two of them went back to walking, talking between themselves, but the third kept listening, kept looking over his shoulder to see what lay beyond. Clint had his friend's full attention. Terry was giving his a little begrudgingly, but Reggie's eyes were large and starry as he listened. As Clint told the story, he almost thought he could hear the leaves crackling outside. The wind in the trees rattled the dying year's foliage against the limbs, and a low whistling could again be heard outside. It was tuneless and wafting, and as it warbled across Clint's sanity, he knew just what was stalking the kids through the woods. As he spun his tail, Clint prayed that he wasn't manifesting his own fears outside the treehouse somehow. Hey, CLC, thanks for joining us. We're reading The Whistler. Come have a seat. He kept asking them to listen, telling them that it was important, but they wouldn't listen to him. They kept walking and talking, and all the while, the crunching of leaves and the rustling of limbs followed them, getting closer and closer. The boy became afraid. The steps sounded large, but he couldn't see anything in the trees as they hiked down the trail. One of the others finally yelled at him, telling him to stop being stupid and just enjoy the trip. There was nothing out there, but he could hear it. He was being stupid. He needed to relax. I paused for dramatic effect, seeing Terry roll his eyes at the description of the boy in the story. That was when he heard the whistling. Clint didn't have to imagine. He could hear the whistling outside the treehouse. It was getting closer and closer as he told the story. Was the story drawing it in? Was Clint calling it from the trees? By now, though, he couldn't stop himself. The story needed to be told, and Clint had become a conduit for it. He would tell it to the end, even if the whistler came right into the treehouse with them. They all froze when they heard the whistling. This was no wind through the boughs of the trees. This was a tuneless, monotonous whistling that cut across the dying afternoon like a sickle through wheat. It was behind them, seemingly on the trail, and they could hear it getting closer and closer. They began to make their way towards the campsite, walking a little faster, but all three looked over their shoulders now. They were all uneased by the whistling, and they all wanted to put some distance between themselves and it. His friend sat forward, hanging on Clint's every word, entranced by the new development. Outside, Clint could hear the whistling coming from just outside the clearing. They didn't talk anymore, they didn't laugh, and they didn't joke. They let their feet take them ever onward, but the whistling followed them. The friend who had insisted it was nothing. Oh, thank you, man. I really appreciate that. Oh, thanks, CLC, for the 20. That's great, man. I hope you enjoy this year's Halloween stories as much, because, not to spoil it, but the Whistler might make a reappearance. Where was I? They didn't talk anymore, they didn't laugh, and they didn't joke. They let their feet take them ever onward, but the whistling followed them. The friend who had insisted it was nothing said that maybe they should speed up a little. The campsite couldn't be far. Once they were there, they could take a side trail and get back to town, or whatever it was would leave, and they could get back to camping. The other two agreed, but all of them knew that the camp out was canceled. None of them would sleep here tonight, not willingly. They sped up, but the whistling followed them steadily. One of them said that they should stop and confront the whistler. This must be a human. Who else or what else could whistle? The other two shot him down. Shot him down, though. The whistling was discordant, jangling against their nerves, sounding like nothing they had ever heard before. Both agreed that they didn't want to find out what whistled like that, so they kept moving. Something bumped the bottom of the tree, but no one seemed to notice. It wasn't a hard bump, it didn't shiver the whole tree. It felt more like an inquisitive tap, a gentle knock. It sounded like someone trying to get their attention. Clint put it out of his head. Maybe it was just the wind or something, he thought, and kept telling the story. We're reading The Whistler if you're just joining us, so pull up a chair. It's just getting good. They kept moving deeper and deeper into the woods, all the time being chased by the whistling. They broke into a run, the campsite still not coming into view, and still the whistling grew closer and louder. The whistling took on a life of its own, rising and falling in its chaotic tune, before becoming less and less discernible. The children put their hands over their ears, the noise scraping against their minds like a rusty scalpel. Their hands would not block out the whistling, though. They heard it inside their heads as it battered their senses, and when the first one tripped, the other two did not stop to help him. They didn't hear his screams, but they felt a change when the whistling thing got him. The night bird called out from the forest, but now the whistling was in Clint's head, and he only registered it as something different. He told the story frantically, hoping it would stop the whistling in his head, fearing what else might call to it. They dropped their packs and ran. They sprinted flat out, knowing that the trail must be just up ahead. They would run, they would turn, they would round the bend, and there it would be. It would be there, as it always was, and they would cut back towards town. It never occurred to them that the creature could just cut through the forest after them. The trail to town had a talismanic effect on them. If they could make it, they could walk it. If they could make it, if they could walk it, they would be safe. They ran, they wept, but the whistling followed them on and on, their feet crunching against the leaves and the pine needles, sounding like gunfire, but they hardly noticed, even over the eerie whistling in their heads. His two friends were leaning close now, the lantern making their face look like a jack-o'-lantern, as their eyes begged for the climax. And still, that whistling assaulted them, threatening to drive Clint mad. If they noticed it, they gave no indication. We're reading The Whistler if you're just joining us, so pull up a chair. It's just getting good. When the second boy fell, the first one never noticed. He ran and ran, trying to outdistance the whistling, trying to get it out of his head, and when his friend was found The whistler again took on a different tone. The lone boy ran and ran, hoping to outdistance the crazed whistling, knowing that his fate would be the same as his friends. Some say he runs to this very day. Some say the whistling got him in the end. No one knows for sure. Clint heard the whistling abate a little. It didn't leave, but it did lighten slightly. Clint felt like crying as he came to the end of the story. Maybe he would be allowed to live where the boys had died. The search parties found their backpacks 2 days later. Animals had worried at them to get at the food, and they were mostly scattered about the trail. They found the campsite bare, no fire having been there in weeks. Of the boys, they found no sign. No trace was ever found, not a scrap of clothing, not a footprint. They were never seen again. But the children in the area say that you can hear the whistling in the woods on quiet nights. On those nights, it's best to stay indoors. The whistling takes all who venture too close, and the whistling will haunt you for the rest of your life, however long that might be. Hey, Avenger, we're reading The Whistler. Come listen. I'm glad you could make it. That was when the whistling stopped. It stopped so abruptly that Clint wondered if he had ever heard it in the first place. For someone his age to question his mental stability was a strange feeling. But at that moment, Clint was just glad that it had passed him by. The other two shook off their rapture, looking as though they had been hypnotized, and Terry blew out a long breath. Well, damn, that was a good story. I can't top that. And suddenly, I'm feeling kind of tired. Yeah, Reggie said, me too. I think maybe we should go to bed. Clint would have argued with them most nights, but tonight he was as drained as the rest. They laid out their sleeping bags and burrowed down, dropping off quickly without the usual talk that preceded it. I'd like to tell you that this is where the story ends. I wish I could, but that wouldn't be doing justice to the memory of those poor boys. I urge you to stop reading here. Let this image be your last sight of them. These 3 young men, asleep in their bags, snoring happily, content with the knowledge that they are immortal and that their parents' love will insulate them from any harm. What you think, chat? Do we go on? Your silence says it all. No? Still here? Very well, then. Don't say I didn't warn you. Clint awoke in the wee hours of the morning when a pillow smashed into the side of his head. It was not thrown playfully, and he came awake angrily. The throw was hard, angry, and directed at his face. As his left ear stopped ringing, Clint became aware of the keening whistling that assaulted his ears. It had returned. It was louder than ever, and it chilled him to the bone. Oh, sit up a little bit here. Oh. There we go. All right. For God's sake, stop it, Terry yelled, staring daggers at Clint. Your story was good. We all said so. But trying to scare us with this stupid whistling isn't funny. Clint became very aware of someone crying and looked over to see Reggie in the corner. Onward, indeed. He was ugly crying, snot and tears mingling down his face, with his hands against his ears. The whistling was loud and discordant, just as Clint had described it in the story. It appeared that Clint wasn't the only one that could hear it now. Terry looked madder than he had ever seen him, and Reggie was clearly terrified after the story that Clint had spun. It's not me, I swear, Clint told Terry, but Terry didn't seem to believe him. He glared at Clint for a few seconds before realizing that he was right. Terry had woken him up. How could Clint be the whistler? Terry moved to the window, and Clint joined him as he searched for the source of the whistling. Most nights, there would have been nothing in the inky darkness, but under the light of the full moon, the yard was shadowy but visible. As they scanned the yard, they could see a little in the pallid light. The fire pit below, the logs they sat on as they toasted their marshmallows and wieners, the woodpile they had tarped against the rain. Clint had almost decided to go check the other window when Terry gasped like a stepped-on cat and backed away. Terry looked again and finally saw. Clint looked again and finally saw what Terry was looking at. A man in a long, dark cloak stepped out of the tree line, and Clint couldn't believe he hadn't seen him before. He was dressed in a long gray coat, a tall cowboy hat, making him look almost 7 feet tall as it poked for the sky. The toes of his pointy boots poked from beneath the coat, and Clint thought they looked battered and scuffed, even from here. The wind seemed loath to touch the man, but by the way he pulled the cloak around him, you'd have thought that he was freezing. Clint could see a pair of eyes reflecting the moonlight as he looked up at them, and he thought the man must be wearing glasses. Of him they could see very little under the coat, but he made them very uneasy. The whistling seemed to be coming from beneath the coat, and when it stopped, he began to speak. Huh? I'm glad somebody got that. Dang. Sometimes I put little jokes in my stories and it seems like they're never going to be found. Clint wished for the whistling again. The stranger's voice was raspy, pinched, croaksome, a dead man's pleading last words. I'm cold, boys. Might I take shelter in your treehouse for the night? Clint shuddered, not knowing what to say. Somehow, Terry found his voice. Go away. Our mothers told us not to talk to strangers, and we don't know you. Please, boys, kind boys, didn't your mother teach you hospitality? Let an old man come in out of the cold. No. Excuse me. No, Terry said, and moved away from the window, as though the man might somehow leap through it. The man didn't yell, he didn't plead. He just sat on the log beneath their tree and continued to whistle. The jagged cords wafted up into the treehouse, and Clint saw Terry shudder. Terry picked up a boot and went to the window to throw it at the man. Terry sent it sailing, but hissed when it didn't connect. He threw other things as well, but the old man never seemed to be where he was aiming. Terry cussed loudly, reaching for the lamp before Reggie wrapped his arms around it, begging him not to. It's all the light we have, Terry, please. Of course, when Stragview calls, you gotta pick it up. He tore it out of Reggie's arms, growling as it came free. He chucked it at the old man, the heavy plastic thing not even getting close to the target. It broke on the ground, shattering and fizzing with an electric pop. The inside of the treehouse was darker for its passing. The three boys now hunkered in the belly of that prison. The whistling went on, though. The man never seemed to run out of breath, and the shrill voice took its toll on all of them. Reggie began to rock in the corner, sobbing loudly as the man whistled on and on. Terry screamed at him from the window, his rage never ending, and Clint covered his ears as he tried to keep the threads of his sanity together. It seemed to last for hours, for days, and as Clint sat with his eyes closed, he prayed that it would end. When he heard the floorboards creak, Clint opened his eyes. He saw Reggie by the window, his foot already on the ledge. "Reggie," Clint breathed, "what are you doing?" Reggie looked back at him, snot runners creeping down his face. His naked face looked tortured, tears cutting lines down his dirty cheek, still streaked with green. He smiled gruesomely. At him as he framed himself in the window. Clint didn't have to ask what he intended to do. He tried to stop him. He pulled himself up from the floor to go to him, but it was already too late. "I just want it to stop," he breathed, before he threw himself out the window. They never heard him hit the ground over that loud, terrible whistling. Terry stormed over to the hatch and had unlatched it before Clint could throw himself across it. "What are you doing?" he breathed. "What do you think I'm doing? I'm going to go do something about this guy." "He's an adult, Terry. You can't do anything to him." "Get out of my way. I'm going out there." "He's scary, Terry. You shouldn't go out there. You'll end up like Reggie. Terry kicked him, sending waves of pain through his guts. Clint rolled off the trapdoor, clutching his wounded body as Terry threw it open. He tossed the ladder down, descending in a shrieking rage as he made for the Whistler. As scared as it had made Reggie, the whistling had made Terry a furious juggernaut. Clint drew himself up, his ribs hurting, and hobbled over to the trap door. He looked down before closing it and gasped in horror against his throbbing chest. The man was at the bottom of the ladder. His face was still hidden by the coat, his eyes a glittering twosome amidst the swirling dark void, and Clint could see thick red fluid around the collar of his cloak. He was 2 rungs up the ladder, temporarily frozen by the boy's gaze, and Clint slammed the hatch and threw the lock a second before the Whistler slammed into it. He crawled away from the hatch, watching it buck wildly and hearing the Whistler scream at him to open it. He shouted blistering curses and howled like an animal, wanting to get in, but stopped by the strong bolt that some past kid had installed on the sturdy hatch. Maybe they had installed it to keep him out, Clint thought. Ugh. Clint lay on the dusty floor of the treehouse, his ribs hurting, as he watched the trap door throb like an infected heart. Just when Clint thought he couldn't take it anymore, the banging stopped, and he was allowed to bask in the thin silence that occupied his next few seconds of life. When the whistling started again, Clint began to shake like a late autumn leaf. The whistling had killed his 2 friends, Clint reflected. As he lay shuddering on the splintery floor, Clint wondered what the search party would find when they found their sleeping bags. Would he, too, be just another story for children to whisper about as they sat around the campfire? As he lay there and shivered under the assault of the invasive whistling, he almost thought about opening the trapdoor and joining his friends in the less penetrating silence that was likely to follow. Oof. It was a long one. That was The Whistler. Hope you guys liked it. Like I said, if you want your own copy, this is Fall Frights and Autumn Chills. There's a link. Hang on. I'll get it for you. There's a link to my Amazon page if you'd like your own book. I've got like 9, so take your pick. Towsey Homestead just come out, so if you'd like a book, then be my guest. I'm always glad for that. Thank you. I like it. It's one of my very favorites. I'm gonna go grab a water real quick. You guys talk amongst yourselves. I'll be right back. Alrighty, I'm back. Got my bottle of water. Wet the pipes a little. Let's see what I've missed. Oh, my allergies last pretty well all the time. Jennifer, to answer your question, the warden's grass is basically anywhere between any of the dorms. Like it could be anywhere. It's basically anywhere in between the dorms. Cause like at least in the prison I worked at, you've got sidewalks and then you've got the areas in between the sidewalks that have grass that inmates tend, but they're not generally supposed to walk on it. And generally, we yelled at them and told them to stay off the warden's grass. So, the warden's grass, I guess, is technically anywhere over there. Somebody wants to come say hi. Anyway, so speaking of, there'll be like 4 new Stragview stories over Halloween, so that should be fun if you're a big fan of the Stragview stuff. Um, which one? The Warden's Grass? Is that in the new one or the old one? Stand by. I could probably find it. Let's see if it's in the new Stragview stuff or the old Stragview stuff. It's gotta be in the. Okay, it's gotta be in the older one then. Yeah, there it is. Oh, now that I got a little bit of water. Where is it? Huh. Well, maybe it wasn't the other one. Huh. Well, don't tell me I've lost it. I mean, it happens to the best of us. No problem, Kevin. I like doing it. It's always fun. Well, where is this story? It's got to be in one of these. I mean, wow. Okay. You telling me I have lost one of my Stragview stories somewhere? I hope not. Hang on a second, chat. Hold on 2 seconds. Sorry about that. Had a little something come up there. My son's phone has been missing for like almost 6 months now, and he just kind of came up with it. So, yay. That's good. Well, it might scandalize you to know that that's how I used to make my money, was by writing porn. So, you know, can't really throw stones there, I guess. Well, I mean, erotica, but, tomato, tomato. Jennifer, we may have to go to Reddit for this one. At least if I have it, I can add it to a later collection there. Yep, there it is. Well, since Jennifer has helped me find it again, seems the least I can do is read for you the long lost Stragview story of the Warden's Grass. So, buckle in. Hey, dumbass, can't you read? Stay off the Warden's Grass. I looked at Scott, the inmate who had been walking next to me, and saw that he had indeed taken a step onto the pristine grass that set between the concrete paths. Scott looked up, making eye contact with the brick of an officer who had yelled at him, and stepped back onto the sidewalk as we walked from the chow hall to our dorm. Normal, stop that. He nodded to the officer, apologizing for his thoughtlessness, and turned back to look at me. His face turned sarcastic almost at once, and Scott theatrically rolled his eyes as the tide of bodies around us moved like blood through a clogged artery. Stay off the Warden's Grass. I don't see the warden out here tending to it. That was true. In fact, no one had actually tended to the now lush green grass that blanketed the spots in between the sidewalk. It had, it seemed, sprung up overnight, and was as lush and green as any oldster's lawn you might see in nearly every suburban neighborhood. Who could blame someone for wanting to walk on it, honestly? It was just so inviting. I had been a resident of Stragview for about a year, and would remain a resident for the next 2 years at least. I had been brought in on charges of breaking and entering, and the judge had decided that since this was my third offense, a trip to real prison would serve me right. I'm not sure Stragview is what I would call a real prison, but it's certainly unlike any prison I've ever been to before. The whole place seems odd sometimes, and the old-timers tell me that the prison is sort of its own little world. Case in point, the mysterious grass. As a member of the grounds crew, I can honestly say that I have no clue how it came to be here. We're experiencing one of the hottest summers in living memory, and the grass had been reduced to mostly dirt and yellow ghosts of what it had been before. Granted, it had never been terrific, but the riot last year had clearly messed it up. The dorm fires and the trampling feet had left most of it flat and kind of crappy looking. And all attempts to seed it or fertilize it had been in vain. We'd kind of given up on it. It was after all grass in a prison, and no one really cared if it looked good or not. No one, it seemed, except the warden. I had grown to hate working grounds in the late afternoons, primarily because of the warden's attention. He had recently moved his office into the old tower that loomed over the compound like a monolith. The place was supposed to be full of rats, at least that's what I had heard, and I couldn't imagine anyone wanting to be there. The rats were supposed to be territorial as all hell, And if you believe that one guy, there was a huge one that lived under the tower. He had told anyone who would listen about it, right up until Henderson had put him off of inside grounds. Honestly, I'm not really sure what happened to him after that, but at any rate, we were talking about the warden. If the rats in the tower bothered him, he never showed it. He worked up in that tower all night sometimes, and if it was overcast or the sun was going down, you could see him pacing around the catwalk, around the top of the tower, and watching the inmates and the guards scurry about below. He would watch us on inside ground sometimes, and I could swear that I could see his eyes on me way too often. He watched us seed the grass, water the grass, fertilize the grass, and always with that look of disapproval on his pinched face. Then one morning we arrived and found this lush sea of green grass where the old grass had been. We had been speechless. We had been preparing for another day of watering and fertilizing, but now there was simply this collection of lush grass in between the sidewalks. Even Henderson looked shocked, but by its sudden appearance. Rory had taken off his work boots and stepped onto it and told us that it was soft, like the grass in his grandpa's yard when he was a kid. His grass in his grandma's yard, like when he was a kid. She had some kind of grass with a hard name to pronounce, and Grandpappy kept it nice and green for her, he told us. Henderson had been summoned to the tower, and then he had come back with a very specific set of instructions. No one is to set foot on the grass, he said, giving Rory a very hard look. We are to put out these signs. Each of them is to be in a specific location around the sidewalk, and we are not to step on the grass when we do it. The only way you are permitted on the grass is if you are riding one of the new lawnmowers. Do not ever set foot on the grass. That's a direct order from the warden. And what if we do? Asked Jax, an imposing inmate who seemed to live to be contrary. Horror stories. It's like Jaws instead of Jaws. Yeah, basically. Or like the sandworms out of Dune, kind of. Excuse me. Henderson gave him a hard look. Then I lock your ass in confinement, and we see how you feel about that. We set out the signs, and only stepped foot on the grass to step onto the new riding mowers that the warden had bought us to maintain the grounds with. I, for one, didn't like to ride them. I was one of 4 inmates that was allowed to ride them. Certain members of the grounds crew were deemed untrustworthy when it came to mowers, so we had to take turns with them. Despite the heat and the drought, the grass constantly seemed to need mowing. You could mow it just before knocking off for the day, and it would need cutting again in the morning. The ground also felt strange as you rode over it. Henderson claimed it was the vibration from the mower, but I know what I felt as I chugged over the small patch of ground. It felt like a boat when something large swims beneath it. Oh, hey man, you're just in time. We're reading another story. Nah, we're still going. We got a little bit of steam left in us here. We are reading the previously lost Warden's Grass, so you're in for a treat. Somehow or another, I had neglected to put it in my Stragview collection, so it is recently rediscovered. I would learn how right I was about a week after the grass came in. Scott and I were walking back after he'd been chastised for stepping on the grass, and he muttered and griped the whole way back to the dorm. Let's see. We fell in line with the rest of them as they tried to make their way back to the dorm, and Scott seemed to seethe all the more as he waited in line. Scott was someone whose parents had probably never told him no, and it had brought him to this point in life. He hated authority, but seemed overly cowardly once confronted by them. This was typical behavior for him, and I just rolled my eyes as he sat there and muttered to himself. Just friggin' grass. Don't see why rada rada rada. Just a dick rada rada. Tell me what to rada rada. I'll show. Just let it go, dude. No one is supposed to walk on the grass. Did you think they made an exception just for you? Hell, I care for the grounds, and I'm not even supposed to walk on the grass. It's so stupid, though. What possible harm could it do for me to walk on the grass? Well, if you do it, then other people will think they can do it. Pretty soon, the grass looks as crappy as it used to, and I have to work twice as hard to make it look nice again. Maybe they just want something nice for a change. I don't know, but it's rules, and we have to follow it, no matter how stupid we think it is, I added with a little wink. It's so stupid, he raged on, the door growing closer and closer. You just know that the guards are out there laying in the grass after they put us up for the night. Why the hell can't they just let us have something nice too? I agreed with him, but I silently doubted it. The guard earlier, the brick that was Debontar, had sounded angry about having to tell Scott about the grass, but there was also something else beyond the surface. Had it been fear? Jail didn't have grass. Our jail doesn't have grass inside either, but we don't really have, anywhere to put it, I suppose. Anyway, Scott hadn't noticed, but I had thought, just for a second, that I had seen him glance around the ground in a strangely fitful way, like a man on a boat checking for sharks after someone falls overboard. Henderson looked around like that sometimes, his usually placid face watchful as he worked. He shouted more and lounged less, especially when someone tried to walk on the grass. This was new for him, and it had gone unremarked by the other inmates. Hold on a sec. Sorry, my wife was texting me. Well, note to self. I mean, you wouldn't follow a channel like that because YouTube wouldn't allow it. I've tried posting stuff that was a little racier and YouTube shoots it right down. I guess it's un-ad friendly, so they don't want anything to do with it. Shit, where were we? The guards seemed scared of something, and the grass appeared to be the reason for the fear. You're still on the porn thing. Oh. I got back into the dorm, Scott heading to the day room to watch TV, and I went to my bunk to chill out with some music. It had been a long day of cutting grass out in the hot sun. I slid my earbuds in and turned on my music, closing my eyes and vibing out for a few minutes, as the world just sort of passed around me. It's funny how these simple pleasures really make a lot of difference in a place like this, and I felt my mind drift a little as the music took me back to a time before I was trapped in this bunk bed, surrounded by sweaty, stinking men. Really? Because every time I try to post something like that, they take it down. I don't know. Maybe I'm pigeonholed into whore. I don't know. That's why I didn't hear the officer calling me until his boot kicked the corner of my bed with a less than gentle impact. I opened my eyes to see the displeased face of Sergeant Farkery as he tapped the side of my bunk with a booted foot. I looked at him, and he looked back at me, and I could already tell what was coming. I already tell that coming out here to tap the bunk was not his first attempt to get my attention. I took my earbuds out and asked him if I could help him. For starters, you could maybe listen up when I call your name over the loudspeaker. I've been trying to reach you for nearly 30 minutes. 30 minutes, I said skeptically. I haven't been back from chow for, but as I looked at my watch, it told me I was mistaken. I'd come back at 5 and it was now 7. Had I dozed off? I rarely lost time like that. and the idea that I had passed out was a little alarming. Medical just called to let me know you missed your pill call out. You need to go get meds from the pill nurse, like now before the sun goes down. I got up, slipped on my Crocs as I went with him to the door. He got on the radio and let the control room know that he had one inmate leaving for medical and let me out onto the yard. He told me to hurry. Count would be in about 20 minutes, and I left out for the medical pavilion. The door slammed shut behind me, and I was suddenly alone on the yard. The medical pavilion was on the other side of the compound, through the center gate and into the outer ward, and it would be a long trip by sidewalk. As I turned, taking the concrete path as I made my way towards the center gate, I saw the grass that lay between and realized that I was going around my elbow to get to my knee. I could just cut across the grass and be there and back before. Sorry, I got a hair in my mouth. Before they even called us for count. I knew I shouldn't. We all knew we shouldn't, but it was a short stretch and I was on a time limit. Plus, the grass looked so inviting. I looked at the yard and saw no one. I looked at the captain's office and saw no one standing around it smoking. I looked at the warden's tower and saw no one standing on the catwalk. I took a tentative step out onto the grass and sighed as the light brush of it struck my leg. It was nice, so soft, and Rory had not been wrong. I bent a little and ran my hand over the grass, feeling it tickle my palm as I went. I had never felt grass this luxurious, and I closed my eyes as I walked, waiting for someone to yell at me for being out there. I didn't care if I got chastised then. I was enjoying my time in the grass as I walked slowly through the tickling bristles. I was halfway across the 15-foot stretch of grass when I felt that small boat, large animal feeling beneath my feet. I can't explain it, it makes no sense, but I was suddenly moved to run. I needed to run flat out, and get back to dry land as quickly as possible. I ran, despite running being the biggest no-no of them all. People who ran in prison drew attention. Running means an emergency, and it was the first thing they taught guards and inmates not to do. I felt the grass tickle me as I ran, that feeling of enjoyment melting away. Excuse me. The tickling was now something akin to the whiskers of some animal as it ran over my nerves. That swelling feeling grew beneath me, like a whale getting ready to breach, and I jumped the last few feet to make it to the concrete. I fell on my hands and knees, bloodying my hands and scuffing my knees as I came back onto the sidewalk. I turned my head, expecting to see it as it split the ground, but there was nothing. The grass waved placidly, the night birds called softly, and the compound seemed peaceful. I walked in a fitful mess, the grass on either side of me looking deceptive as I walked. Every stalk seemed to wave at me, seemed to entice me, seemed to say, "Come frolic in me, it's okay." I could remember a picture book from when I was a child about a choo-choo train that had gotten in trouble for playing in the buttercups, and the grass looked like those buttercups had. So warm, so inviting, so much like a trap. I walked to medical as the sun set, feeling so much the better once I was past the center gate. I was stuck in medical for count. It had taken longer than I thought, I guess, and when I got out, it was nearly full dark. I had almost forgotten about the grass somehow, though I'm not sure how, but seeing it again made me remember the experience anew. I stopped at the gate, looking at all that green, and felt my legs getting shaky. I didn't feel like I had the strength to walk back across the grassy area, even on the sidewalk, and I clung to the fence as I waited for someone to notice me. At that point, I would have gone to confinement if it meant that I didn't have to face that swaying green trap again. Unfortunately, someone wearing blue found me first. "Hey, buddy, you okay?" I turned and found Jensen, an inmate I knew from around. Jensen volunteered to work inside grounds sometimes, and was just an all-around nice guy. He lived in a different dorm than I did, but he but he was well known for being a hard worker and a go-getter. He appeared to have he appeared to have been coming out of medical too, and I remembered that he was an orderly. He was probably just getting off of work, and he looked around the yard as the light poles as the as the posts lights came on, bathing the grass in a bright light. Looks like a pretty night. Need a hand back to your dorm? He could clearly see that I was in distress, and his first impulse was to help me. I thanked him, and the two of us made our way back to the dorm. Let's see. As we walked, he babbled about his long old day, and I must have looked half crazy as I walked beside him and craned my neck around in paranoia. I still felt like something in that grass was watching me, and it seemed odd that there were no guards about either. Where the hell was everybody? Inmates weren't usually allowed to just stroll around after dinner chow. The absence of guards made it all seem so much worse, and I found myself turning my head fitfully as we walked. When we came to my door, I sighed and turned to thank Jensen. I felt pretty silly now, being spooked by whatever that had been, and I hoped Jensen wouldn't tell people what a friggin' scaredy cat I had been. I had acted like a damn child, and now that I was back at my door, I couldn't imagine why I had been so spooked. Hey, thanks, G, for subscribing. There's a lot of these in a playlist if you like the Stragview stuff. I like that little thing it does there. That's cool. Let's see. No problem at all, Jensen said. You know, since no one's out here, I think I'm going to run through that grass to get back to my dorm. It looks so soft, like the grass my dad used to fuss over back home. I tried to warn him not to, but he took off running towards the stretch between my dorm and his dorm. I saw him slip off his Crocs as he got to the edge and run barefoot through the tall grass. I watched him go, my warning dying in my throat, and I felt even sillier as he made his way luxuriously through the tall grass. Jensen didn't seem to have any qualms about the grass, and I was almost jealous as he walked barefoot through the tall, soft grass, right up until something breached the ground and swallowed him in a single bite. It dove back down like an orca picking a bird off the surface, and the ground and the grass looked just as it had before. The officer came when I started screaming. They came from the captain's office and from my dorm and from all over to see why an inmate was out after dark screaming like a lunatic. They drugged me off to a show cell in medical, and I spent the next few days eating food out of a styrofoam tray and gibbering about grass monsters and Jensen's disappearance. They let me sit in there for 3 days, raving and ranting, before the warden came out of his tower to have a look at me. I can still... probably. That would be a nice touch. I can still remember him sitting there in his pinstripe suit and little gold glasses, staring hungrily at me through the glass. I understand that you saw something the other night. I nodded, preparing to speak, but he cut me off. I'd suggest that if you ever want to get out of this place, you forget what it was and go right on cutting that grass and not thinking about it. Oh, he said before turning to go, do continue to tell your friends to stay off the grass, though. My hospital stay was almost a month behind me now, and I've nearly convinced myself I hallucinated the whole thing. Every time I notice Jensen is gone, though, I remember and have to resist the urge to go batshit crazy all over again. I wouldn't even be writing this, but I need someone to get me out of here after what I saw today. I can't stay here another minute, not knowing what I know now. I was on my mandatory day off. We get at least one a week, and I was walking the track on the rec yard. I used to play baseball or lift weights, but these days I seem to just be listing through my stay here like a ship with no rudder. I was circling the track by the back fence when something caught my eye and made me leave the track for the grassy area between. Normal grass, dead yellow grass, not the lush stuff like on the compound. I started walking towards the fence, ignoring the guard who yelled at me as I wrapped my fingers around the cold metal of the fence. I could hear him call again, but I barely noticed. Outside the fence, butting up to the woods themselves, was a thick wall of tall grass. It was lush, green, and unending, and as I watched the grass roll like a tide, as whatever resided within it moved around, looking for its next victim. So, Mr. Mason, if any part of this letter reaches you, I beg you to get me a transfer somewhere else. Otherwise, I might not make it out of here alive. And I'll just be taking that. And that is The Warden's Grass, as asked for by Jennifer Spoons. Thanks, Jennifer. Like I said, I had completely forgotten about the story. Damn it. Just let me have it. Let me have the thing. Ugh, it's being difficult. I just want to grab the thing. It's my story, damn it. No problem. Thank you for suggesting it, because I had completely forgotten about it. And I didn't know that it wasn't already in something. Let's see. We will put that one right there. Ugh, it did that thing again. I love Google Docs, don't get me wrong, but sometimes it makes things 10 times harder than they need to be. And it didn't double space it. Ugh. I swear. Oh, no, it did. Good. Oh, no rest for the wicked. Alrighty, guys. I think that's probably about going to do it for me. We've been going for about 2 hours, so my voice is about wrecked, and I've got to record some more Halloween stories tomorrow, unfortunately. Fortunately for you guys, and I guess fortunately for me, I don't know, because there's a ton of them. Any more pressing questions before I get off? I guess I could do about another 10 minutes if you guys had anything you want to talk about. I don't know what it was, but ever since I had that crap from last week, I've had this, perpetual tickle in the back of my throat I can't seem to get rid of. Oh. Well, oh yeah, we are coming up on Halloween time, and I've got a big fat load of Halloween stories for you guys. Probably spend all of October just working on Christmas stories for when it's Christmas time. Oh, but I wrote a ton of stories for Halloween this year. Enough so that I actually have a bunch of them for next year too. So I've already got to step up on my next year Halloween stories. Well, thank you, Avenger, for hanging out with us. Thanks, guys, for coming to the live stream. It's always great to see you. I'll catch you guys next time. Dr. Plague, signing off. Oh, hang on. We do has a question. What do it? Oh, she eats it. Oh, no. I totally want to keep doing the short stories too. I like to do novels too, because I think they're cool to do, you know. I don't know. People like novels. I would like to do more novels. All right. Anyway,